Westandwa same, oh, my fohloza, angilutho ngaphandle kwakho, angilutho ngaphandle kwakho, eluhlale kusekwami, uphefuthu ngalo yami, ubesitshe sidle.
Comrades, good morning. Dumelang. Lekai. Reteng. Without wasting too much time, what we are going to do this morning is have the presenters present one after each other and then open up for question and answers like we did yesterday, right? Cool. If you do have questions, please write them down and keep them brief, okay? Our first session is going to be presented by Professor Nelson Maldonado Torres, titled Coloniality at the Frontiers of Civilization, the US, the Modern Zionist, and the South African Coloniality Principle. Let's just wait for him to make his way to the front.
Thanks so much, Josene, for the moderating duties and introduction. I'm really glad to be here. And I literally just arrived from the airport after getting to Johannesburg last night. And the reason why I am joining the school late this year is that had a previous commitment in Martinique, the island where Frantz Fanon was born. He was born in 20th July, 1925, and we're celebrating the centenary, 100 years after his birth. And this year, this entire year, there have been a myriad of activities in different places. I co-preside the Frantz Fanon Foundation with Mireille Fanon Mendes France, who is Fanon's daughter. We have been very busy through the year, organizing our own events, but also supporting other events and participating in other events. And so the last one, in July, we had the main event of the foundation in Paris in early July, and then last week in Martinique. And so getting to Martinique from Puerto Rico, Martinique is also part of the Caribbean. I am from Puerto Rico, it's part of the Caribbean. I believe that you have met my Puerto Rican compatriots in the room. If you were dancing yesterday, if you were listening to the rhythms, that's where I also come from. Huh? Yes, Bomba. They're coming from Loiza. I'm sure they explain where they're coming from, what the music is about. I'm really proud to be part of the Puerto Rican delegation with them. And they know that one characteristic of the Caribbean is that the European empires split us apart, right? Split the region apart, multiple languages. I mean, you know that experience also here in Africa, right? That notion of getting a territory and split it apart on the basis of the interests of the colonizers. The Caribbean was ground zero for that, right? What you got in this idea of the European in the Berlin Conference dividing Africa between the different powers, the German, the Belgian, the English, and so on. They did that in the Caribbean through initial centuries after 1492. And so we're all split apart. With the indigenous population was largely largely eliminated in the region. There was a new population group brought up, of course, from the shores of Africa, and then we became something else. We became a new kind of entire region. I think for the first time in the history of human civilization, that we have an entire region being kind of repopulated in such ways, eliminated and repopulated in such short time, aggressive through violent means. That's where we come from, and that means that our islands are separated. I say that because that will explain why also getting from Puerto Rico to Martinique, which are fairly close, I think now it takes more time. You can get faster to Europe, possibly, to the Iberian Peninsula, to Spain or to Portugal from Puerto Rico than getting to Martinique. That's how it is. So imagine, think about that. And thus returning is also quite timely. It takes a lot of time, and then, so I had to go back to Puerto Rico, and from Puerto Rico then to South Africa. So it's been quite, right? That's why I come here at this moment. And I wanted to say that this talk that I'm doing today, I'm also doing in honor of Fanon in the 100th anniversary, even though it's not going to be a talk about Fanon. And for us, the foundation, the more important part of Fanon, right, is yes, what he said, but also what he stood for. What he stood for, the kind of questions he raised, the kind of battles that he chose, the approach to reality as a battlefield or combat zone where we need to be engaged, right? And firmly to participate against the forces that reproduce our dehumanization. So in a way, what is most important is the continued projects for liberation, decolonization, emancipation, as they happen in different places. And so what I'm going to share is part of that ongoing reflection. And this is part, I'm going to sketch some ideas that are part of, an essay that is finished, and I hope it will appear in a few months. And also, but that work keeps developing. One way to look at what I'm doing in this reflection and what I'm offering today could start by looking at George Frederickson's A Short History of Racism. It's a short book about history of racism, but it focuses and it actually identifies 3 sites in the 20th century that the author says represent maybe, or came to represent for him, the climax, right, the maximum expression of racism, according to him. And he said these 3 places are, one of them, Nazi Germany, right? We're talking about places where racism not only occurs, but it was sanctioned by law, and the state and the different state institutions and apparatus were working according to the doctrine of race, right? And formally, very formally and intentionally, right? So Nazi Germany is one. Then he says the United States was another, because of the whole, even after they legalized slavery, the entire system of persecution, of apartheid in the country, legalized division, separation between different peoples. So he says the US is the second one. And the third, he says, is South Africa. Right? South Africa, because of the explicit apartheid that being for a great part of the 20th century. So he, as an expert on the history, he's a historian of race and racism. He highlights those 3 points, right? Those 3 geopolitical places. And so I think that today, if I were to think about, places where we can find these very prominent examples of racism, I would probably look at the so-called frontiers of Western civilization, right? In the frontiers, right, in those areas where the settlers or would-be settlers are encountering so-called native populations, right? You know that there are unnamed and unspeakable crimes take place in the frontiers, right? In the name of expanding that civilization, right? Because usually in the frontiers, the state, the state is complicit with the violence of the settlers, protects them, even when it's not necessarily official doctrine. Everything becomes takes a drastic form of violence in the interest of the settlers in the so-called frontiers. The frontiers are imagined as this savage territory that needs to be domesticated, with also savage and primitive populations that need to be pushed down and controlled, if not eliminated, right? And so in this recent kind of paper I wrote, I look at what I refer to as the Western civilization continuum, or the core of the Western civilization continuum, which goes from the United States on one hand, right? The United States, also think about it as a place that dominated, took over an entire territory gradually. It was at the frontier of Western civilization in the West, right? And push the Western civilization project, the conception of Western civilization, it pushed, it took over, it dominated an entire territory. And so, and then it went abroad, and Puerto Rico then is a colony of the U.S. as part of that same impulse of the U.S. impulse of pushing Western civilization beyond the so-called frontiers. On the one hand, and then in the 20th century, through the 20th century and today, we see in the East is the Israeli state project of settler colonialism and genocide. Again, seeing itself also as representing civilization against barbarism in the so-called Middle East, right? Also pushing the Western civilization project there to the East. So, and on the basis of that, I think about what are the philosophical principles, philosophical, ethical, political principles that sustain these projects at the frontiers of Western civilization. And I think that there is something to learn about that, because usually, as I said before, at the frontiers, you find creative forms of domination and unspeakable acts that then are the ones that continue to spread, right? It goes from the frontiers. They do not only happen in the frontiers, but in the frontiers you can see them, sometimes with such clarity that then allows you to better identify them in other places. And you know that what happens in the frontier is going to appear in other places too. Whatever is successful at the frontier in controlling the native populations is going to be exported somewhere else. So what happens at the frontiers doesn't stay in the frontiers. Right? That's why some comrades in New York insist on the idea that Palestine, yes, we need to demonstrate solidarity with Palestine, but do not forget that Palestine is everywhere. Whatever is happening here is already happening. Whatever is happening there is already happening here. And what is happening there can also then anticipate what will soon happen here if it hasn't happened already, right? And we cannot say that we are in solidarity with Palestine as this horrific genocide that is taking place there. But then when we are here, we're complicit with capitalism, we're complicit with the university industrial complex, we're complicit with, right, with the powers that be in our context, right? Because the coloniality there is not only about genocide, it's also to the extent that they get to survive the genocide, the future expected for them is one of assimilation into the systems that are being forced upon us. So being in solidarity with Palestine means that we need to fight those systems where we are. Right? It's not simply a matter of speaking, as it were, truth to power. And the harsher I talk, and the harsher I talk against the genocide, the more radical I am. No, it's not about that. That's good for showmanship, right? For performing radical politics. And I'm not saying that does not need to be asserted, but the heart of the matter is not that. The heart of the matter is a struggle where you are, right? Because Palestine is also here. So now I was thinking about these frontiers of Western civilization. I was then thinking, precisely because I knew I was coming here and I've been in dialogue with South African comrades, colleagues, friends now for more than 10 years. And I think, well, of course, I need to look at that other frontier of the Western civilization project down south. Right? Not only west, the US, east, the state of Israel, but down south, South Africa. So this is kind of my first attempt now linking those three sites. Right? Now, South Africa, the state of Israel, and the US. Right? That's why I began with Frederickson when he was looking at it from the 20th century. He was thinking that it was important in the 20th century to look at the US, Nazi Germany, and South Africa. So I think that we still need to look at the US and South Africa. Now we have to take a look at the state of Israel. And what is common to the three sites is that they are at the so-called frontiers. When the Western Civilization Project is encountering its limits, is settling there and figuring out what to do in face of the so-called native population. Right? And so I will explain what I find important about the South African case vis-a-vis the US and the Israeli case. So before continuing, I would like to know how until when do I have to speak so that the dear moderator? 30 minutes, 30? Okay, thank you. So let me sketch for you. And already the sketch I'm going to present, part of it is in the article that you're going to be able to read in a few months, and part of it is part of this work in progress. First, because not everything could fit into the article, and also because as time goes, you keep developing connections and ideas. So I want to, I come in from mainly, let's say, philosophy as a field, right? So let's say this is an attempt to elaborate a philosophical exploration of the principles that sustain the political and social realities that we're familiar with. And that there are principles I think should be very clear, because when the principles is what allow also for there to be consistency across the change, consistency in the implementation of things. If there were not some basic principles, then we will see far more diversity and divergence than what we find now, I think. But there is a reason why there are so many things in common between the forms of domination that you find in the US, in the state of Israel, and South Africa. Right? And I think it speaks about underlying principles and agreements across the Western civilization continuum. Among the differences and important differences, right? So connections and similarities and deep linkages doesn't mean that all the places are equal or the same. Of course not, right? There's so many divergences, but we cannot lose sight of what is common, the underlying principles that still you can identify in the different places. And I think that the first principle and the main principle I would like to identify in the formation of the Western civilization continuum is I think we can call it the coloniality principle. Coloniality principle. The coloniality principle. And not decoloniality is so difficult in English, and particularly for someone who doesn't speak English as a foreign language. I'm not saying decoloniality principle, I'm saying the, T-E-H-E, coloniality principle, right? So this principle, the coloniality principle, emerges at the end point of I think I propose to call the Christendom principle. Christendom principle. And the Christendom principle, I'm thinking before 1492, before the 1400s, before the expansion of these European kingdoms across Africa, and particularly the so-called discovery of the Americas in the late 1400s. And in this principle I think came to be formed, particularly when Christianity becomes the official religion of the Roman Empire. Right? And Enrique Dussel, a liberation theologian and philosopher, has indicated that we should differentiate Christianity from Christendom. Christendom, that the state apparatus, the imperial ideology, the imperial kind of logic of organizing the empire, with Christianity as a kind of a maximum and true religion. And so when Christianity becomes at the center of this empire, then now you map the empire in relation. What you find in the empire are the non-Christians, and you put different names to them, pagans, Jews, and so on and so forth, right? And you relate to them as the Christendom at that time and the principles of the empire led to. So this is a principle, the Christendom principle, a principle that regulated order in the Christian kingdoms, where characteristics of this principle are, first, that theology is the highest form of knowledge. The church and the crown are the highest socio-political forms of power, the church and the crown. There is an other so-called otherworldly orientation in that, in theory at least, everything important is supposed to be done for the sake of God. God is the creator, the beginning and the end of this system, right? Now, we could go on and on and on, but I just want to sketch, right? This is some of these principles. So the Christendom principle was there before the formation of the coloniality principle, and this Christendom principle begins to be undermined between the 1200 and the 15th century by scientific observations, right? Realizing that the earth is not flat, or the sun is not at the center of that the earth is not at the center of the universe. Also, the non-conversion of Jews and Muslims gave rise to questioning that, because there was a extreme belief that, through persuasion, Jews and Muslims will convert, and their conversion will be in accordance to the end of times. So Christians at that time were figuring, they were all the time waiting for Christ to come back. But for Christ to come back, there was supposed to be this conversion, not of everyone, but large conversion of different peoples, and that wasn't happening. And then also another challenge to this principle was the rising Christian humanism of the time, that questioned the overall centrality of God in this system and the domination and the scholasticism of the time. And also then, of course, the so-called discovery of the New World. That was one of the most important challenges to that system, because, right, how could it be that neither the Bible nor theologians, there was nothing in accepted scripture that said anything about this world that has been discovered? How can that even be, right? So you realize that before you were relying on the scriptures, Christian scriptures, to provide you knowledge about the world. How can you trust them anymore when you were missing that effing much, right? And that's why one of the writers at the time, when he writes to the king, pointing out the significance of the so-called discovery of the Americas, he says that the discovery of these lands were the greatest event in human history after the birth and resurrection of Christ. Because again, something completely new. So that's what it meant for. And what it did, though, was then to further put the Christendom principle in crisis and to open up the gates for the formation of another principle. And it's the principle that will be linked with so-called modernity, and the principle that has been kind of underlying our own civilization project since then, globally, through the West, through the push of the West. And so that leads to the emergence of the coloniality principle. Now, in the coloniality principle, right, conversion is not the central issue anymore. Conversion is not the central issue. The main debate is whether the so-called discovered peoples even have a soul or should be preached to, right? Even if they are subjects of the queen and subjects of God, right? So it's another kind of investigation that begins to take place there. Also, Christian humanism is not the main threat in this system, but I would say that what emerges instead is a form of Manichaean humanism. A Manichaean humanism. Here I'm drawing from Fanon himself and others who were talking that colonialism, modern Western colonialism, produces a Manichaeism. That is, that it begins to map the world according to how it identifies different populations with either goodness or evil. And that means that I think that this is a point that often fails to be acknowledged because folks have adopted more and more the nomenclature of the son of being and son of non-being. First, that Fanon himself, when you read it, is my view. He did not propose that that concept to refer to sons of dehumanization. He was talking about some existential dynamics when he wrote about the son of non-being in Black Skin, White Masks. What he insists more than anything is this Manichaean reality. And the Manichaean reality is not one between being and non-being. It's between good, pure good, and evil. Right? And that makes a difference. Because for the colonizer, they feel not only that they are being, but they are supremely good and innocent. That's why they spend so much time creating the conditions of possibility for them to appear to themselves and to the world as innocent and as generous. Innocence and generous, right? Remember the episode with Zelensky and Trump and the vice president telling, you have not even said thank you to him. You need to thank. Right? You need to be dominated, pushed down, and still you need to thank the oppressor for, right? So that's not simply comes because you are and others not, but because you believe yourself to be ultimately the pinnacle of goodness. And so likewise, when you identify others, it's not simply because they don't have like an essence. If they don't have an essence, if they are not, then they are not. They are, I could be indifferent to them because they are not. But the behavior coloniality, how it works, is this massive form of violence and genocide is because what you find there is an intrinsic evil that needs to be erased. So that's why it takes the form of a constant war against those subjects who are identified. To be racialized is to be linked with evil itself, and we need to get rid of this evil. So that's why what you feel as a racialized communities feel themselves not simply as left behind, right, as ignored, but as completely, finding or facing constant daily threats of death as if they lived in a context of war. Because what is at stake is the eradication, the control of evil itself and the eradication. In any case, that's a specific element of the principle of coloniality, this Manichaean so-called humanism. Then in this new system, and this is something that Sylvia Wynter calls attention to, this system not only operates for the sake of God, it's not motivated to do things for the sake of God, but for, she says, our sake. She uses the Latin notion propter nos. There's a shift from doing things for God's sake, for our sake. But this hour, the question is, how do you understand this hour? This hour is the good, is for those who consider themselves good, right? For their sake, for the sake of the Christian nations, that now do not see themselves only as the ones who happen to believe in the true religion, but also as the subjects who represent goodness in the world. And therefore they push the so-called white man's burden, right? That they feel the burden that they need to take this goodness everywhere. So they colonize and they commit genocide and murder, but they don't see it like that. They're just bringing gifts to the people. Right? That's why they don't recognize that. It doesn't translate for them in their system. But this is the coloniality principle. The coloniality principle at stake is this, that you produce this reality and then at the same time you appear as good and innocent. So in this process, as I was mentioned, precisely because of this Manichaeism, there is another shift that happens, that in Christendom, in the principle of Christendom, when the Christian kingdoms were in conflict with other governments and other peoples around it, peoples with other beliefs and other forms of social and political organization, Christianity adhered itself to what it called the just war theory, just war, right? That when they engaged in conflict, even when they took people as slaves, they were doing legitimately under the laws of just war, right? If you are in war, right? And then the laws of war, means that you do everything to avoid war. But once you engage into war and you go into war with another group, then you have the right to do certain things with their property. You have the right to do things with their labor. You can take them as slaves. That was codified. That was in a way codified in Christendom. But what I argue is that you see what in the shift from the Christendom principle to the coloniality principle is the naturalization of war. That now warring behavior by those who consider themselves good is now seen as part of nature, is seen as part of the destiny of the good people. That they are warriors for good against evil. So now you don't need to find out, right, whether there are legitimate reasons to go into war with another group or to engage in this behavior. Now, their appearing as evil is by itself a reason, substantial reason, to engage in this behavior against them. So they will know of war without an end, no matter what they have done. No matter whether they insulted, whether they resisted, only the fact that they exist calls for this behavior. So this is the naturalization of war. And that's why the movement for Black Lives, when they released their policy platform in about 2020, the first imperative in the policy platform is end the war on Black lives. Right? End the war on Black lives. So war gets another status altogether, right? Now, I think that this principle, was the driving principle embedded in the expansion of Europe across the world, across the planet, the Americas, and other places. Now, still is alive, it continues, but I think there have also been mutations and transformations and enrichment of the coloniality principle. And one of those mutations you see already 300 years after the so-called discovery of the Americas, 300 years. Now, at the end of the 18th century, other things begin to happen. Because for those original 300 years, even though the Christendom principle was no longer really dominant, and it was increasingly delegitimated, still, the church played an important role in power and the monarchies. And it is in this 300-year mark, for multiple reasons, that now the Europeans themselves turn against the remnants of the Christendom principle. Begin to criticize the position of the church, and thus they fight for the division between church and state. And also they challenge the monarchies directly, perhaps in the most extreme case, in the case of the French Revolution. And so you see the transition from monarchical forms to so-called republican forms of government, where now the nation state, the creation of the nation state is at the center of this. So in this new form of new variation of the coloniality principle, we find a stronger anti-monarchical impulse and a stronger scientific impulse. And there is no coincidence that it was precisely in the late 18th century and early 19th century when we see the massive taxonomies, scientific taxonomies of people legitimating the racial division of humankind. And also when we see the birth of disciplines like anthropology to try to understand the natives, right? Now, I don't think that the French Revolution could not provide the strongest support for the new form of coloniality. I think the place where we find the strongest form of support for this new form of coloniality, potentially called republican coloniality, right? Alongside the imperialistic, largely imperialistic, this is a coloniality about creating the nation state itself, the republic, right? Not about dominating others, right? They are linked, but this one is focusing on the makeup of the government itself. And I think that beyond the French Revolution, the project that really marks is more definitive, leading us to the the affirmation of this principle is the US revolution, the revolution in the United States. And think about the difference between the French and the US revolutions, right? So in case of the French, it was strongly anti-monarchical. But you already have you were not fighting for more territory. It's still France, it's still order, whereas in the US, is pushing completely the colonizer out. So what is left is something that is why in the US they say something younger, it feels with less heavy. They don't have to deal with the weight of the monarchy, like in England, like in France, and so on. They can focus on the expansion of their colonies into the republic. And now the republic becomes the empire. The empire is fused with the republic and the republic with the empire. So the nation state itself, and that's why the US then becomes maybe the largest, I don't know the largest, but certainly the most impactful project of Republican coloniality, right? Where now the republic, the nation state, fuses with the empire and vice versa. But you don't have an empire overseas. What you do is you extend yourself through the land and in the frontier of Western civilizations, and you apply the coloniality principle, but you innovate because now you're building a home for the settlers. You're not taking places in another, you're not taking territories in another place. You're not building a home for the settlers. So the technologies of building a nation state, I think, that became part of the US in the project of expansion were the tools that then were given to other nation states through the globe to build their own nation states. So I think it's important, the US revolution is important for that, because it allows us to understand the mechanisms at play, that logic of coloniality that was implemented in the creation of the other states, including the states that emerged in the 20th century after the wars for independence. Right? So we need to interrogate the extent to which in our different republics through the world, we're already linked not only to 1492 and the coloniality principle, but also to the US principle. Right? So maybe the US is already with us, right? In terms of the technologies of state making and social order that appears in our environment. And this is perhaps the clearest example of this. One strong example, Hitler realized this. And Hitler from Nazi Germany, it was clear that he was reading about US history in order to see. He was reading about what the settlers in the US did with the native populations and with the slave population for him to determine what to do with the Jewish population and other so-called problematic populations in Germany. That is, the US history of that coloniality became a guiding principle. Right? But today, I think that you see that connection between the US coloniality principle and then what is going in the state of Israel. Right? And the state of Israel is itself like taking us back almost to the early 19th century, the moments of expansion of the US, using kind of the same old justifications, right? And so the companionship between the US and Israel is no accident. It's not simply political. There is an affinity there in the principles. And then in something else that the US coloniality principle, and that's how I spread it out in the article. The US principle or the US coloniality principle has a different relationship with Christianity and religiosity. Because in the European one, we saw more a rejection of Christianity because it was rejecting the Christendom principle. But in the US, remember that the settlers were Puritans, wanting to find more space to affirm their own religion. The principle, the coloniality principle in the US is far more connected with sacralization, what has been called the sacralization of politics. Right? And so I know, there are different folks doing work on this, like Nadira Shalhoub-Kevorkian and others. And I think that also needs to be taken into consideration, that role of the US. And of course, in Israel is, even beyond that, is the strong messianism, right? And then now that instead of having a democratic set of peoples and plural people, they are building an ethno-national state. So I think these are experiments that are taking place and that are informing. And what we find in South Africa, and I'm sorry that it has taken me so long when now we have 2 minutes to get to South Africa. But in the case of South Africa, and here I am initiating a dialogue with Mongobe Ramose. And because as I began to think of, well, how do I think of South Africa in relation to the US coloniality principle and to the modern political Zionist political principle, then I need to have these critical readings of the history of South Africa. And it turns out Mongobe Ramose has been for the last 10 years at least engaging in this, critically examining the constitutions in South Africa and showing how the constitutions in South Africa, even the 1996 constitution, reassert what I would call the coloniality principle. Right? He would not call it like that. But this is part of a dialogue that we have been, exchanges that have taken place in the DECOLONIALITY summer school in Cape Town, where Professor Ramose had been giving these lectures. So in this next new chapter of the reflection that I engage in, Ramose, and what Ramose says about what he calls conqueror South Africa. And he says, we should not call South Africa anymore South Africa. That's a wrong name for the country. And we should call it conqueror South Africa because conqueror is making clear that the structure of the state is continuing the principles of conquest. Since the arrivals of the Dutch and since the formation of these colonial constitutions. So conqueror South Africa, then, and we should look towards something else, perhaps liberated Azania, and to generate what he calls post-conquest constitutions, right? But now in there is, the dialogue is interesting that opens up there. And I have many coincidences with Professor Ramose's approach, but some differences too. But the differences are very complementary too, right? For example, and I will end with this. Professor Ramose writes that in the case of South Africa, what we have seen is that since the arrival of the Dutch, there was an attempt to justify the settlement and conquest of peoples here in South Africa on the basis of just war theory. That is just war, right? That, again, they are taking this from the book that was written in the so-called discovery. They come in here, they also using that, the same logic. But Professor Ramos is saying, but it fails, right? It doesn't add up. It's clearly manipulating just war theory. It clearly don't justify. And the native peoples even realize that it doesn't make sense. And my argument is that that's true. But that's true because the issue is that some new reality have emerged already. So the just war theory is only the rhetorical attempt to articulate something, a reality that has changed. And what has changed is that war now doesn't really have to be justified. They're trying to, but they really don't have to justify. As long as they get to a place that was unknown by Europeans, and there are these subjects who are not European, right, in these Manichaean structures, that's it. The fate of the European is in taking their civilization, taking that space, right? Bringing legitimate work to that space, enlightening the peoples, and that's it. There's no need. So I think that you can see what happened here as the implementation of the naturalization of war. And so what he tries to explain in reference to just war theory and the impossibility of actually justifying conquest on the basis of just war theory, I see rather as the consistent application of a new principle that has emerged in all that time, right? Now, Professor Ramose has resisted the idea of decoloniality, and even he says in one of the articles that there is no such decolonial term, but it's interesting when you read the article, he's saying that in the different constitutions of South Africa, there has been no decolonial term. And when I was reading Professor Ramose's writing, I say, of course, there has not, right? If you are familiar with the concept of the decolonial term, it emerged in reference to the views of racialized people and black people who came together to criticize the system and to open new ways of thinking. So none of the constitutions are about that. So I think that there are some confusions that we have to clarify with the professor as part of our continuing dialogue. But I think that he also has much to offer to think about what is the South African coloniality principle, or the coloniality principle embedded in Conqueror South Africa. Thank you.
Comrades, thank you, Nelson, illuminating as usual. And it's nice sometimes and refreshing with seasoned teachers when they stand up and present, you know, in ways that are accessible. So thank you very much for that. More hands. Okay, we're going to have a bit of a refresher from the more academic, and we are going into a little bit of poetry. Suleiman Raja, please make your way to the front.
Apologies, I didn't introduce Nelson, but I'll do that after Suleiman Raja. But let me quickly say, Suleiman Raja is a songwriter and poet and currently serves on the executive of the Solidarity Action Committee Collective Potchefstroom for Palestine and the SABDS Coalition. He's also with the Global Anti-Apartheid Movement on the executive committee. Thank you.
Good morning, all. My name is Mohammed Saida. Suleiman Raja is next to me. He has requested that I read the poem on his behalf, and I'm privileged to actually do so with your permission. Before I begin, I think it's important to explain that a Nakba Qasida, a Qasida is an Arabic and Urdu word for poem. And the poem that he's written has elements of poetry as well as a ghazal, which is something that is sung as part of poetry. So as I read through, you'll get an essence of what he is saying. But also, he's written it in a very unique way in that each part has a title. And I will explain, I'll read that before I read the poem. Okay? He says, 75 years inside the wall, a Nakba Qasida in 77 lines. The first part is the wall is a liar, and in brackets he says deception. A land without people, they declared to the sun. So we etch deeds in olive sap, threadbare and stubborn. Justice hid her scales beneath a soldier's boot. We weighed truth in shrapnel scars, and UN reports left mute. The second heading is, the wall is a bank vault, and in brackets, theft. It swallowed deeds whole, spat back barbed wire hymns. We bartered keys for hope, wore them as pendants. Justice sold her blindfold to fund new settlements. We blindfolded statues, made them weep marble. The third, the wall is a child, and in brackets, terror. It wets itself at night, fearing our lullabies. We answered with nursery rhymes in Sniper Alley. Justice traded her sword for a kindergarten CCTV. We taught alphabet with stones, A for airstrike, B for boycott. Couplets of resistance. They archived our agony in classified folders. We tattooed the coordinates on our tongues. They uprooted 74 olive trees at dawn. We planted figs in the gaps of the tank treads. They mass-produced our martyrs' anonymity. We ID'd each body by their childhood sweets. The fourth, the wall is a cancer, consumption. It metastasizes through birth certificates. We salted its roots with exiled poets' saliva. Justice coughed up gavels like tumorous bones. We x-rayed her ribs and found Palestine's map. Fifth, the wall is a forger, erasure. It rebrands our embroidery as ancient Hebrew motifs. We stitched our DNA into keffiyeh weaves. Justice notarized the theft with Parker pens. We signed the sky with smoke from burning archives. Couplets of resistance. They banned the watermelon's colors. We painted whole neighborhoods in its guts. They sprayed herbicides on our wheat fields. Our wheat grew taller, drunk on martyr's iron. They wrote laws in disappearing ink. We rewrote them with phosphorescent blood. 6, the wall is a judge, perversion of law. It gavels down homes like auctioneers' hammers. We filed appeals against our grandparents' teeth as inkwells. Justice wore a necklace of explosive bullets. We melted them into microphones for dead singers. 7, the wall is a mirror, projection. It screams terrorist as my son's rubber band gun. We exhibited the bullet that outlived his childhood. Justice polished her reflection with our mother's shawls. We shattered all glass and walked barefoot towards her. Couplets of resistance, 13 to 24. They outlawed the word return in schools. Children spelled it with their teeth chatter at checkpoints. They caged the poet, so we memorized verses, recited them through cell walls in Morse code whispers. They bulldozed the cemetery, so we buried seeds until the dead rose wheat where tanks once kneeled. They stole our stars to decorate their flag. We navigated by the holes left in the night. They jailed the cartographer, so we drew maps with our veins on interrogation room floors. They silenced the muazzin, so we learned to pray with our heartbeats when tongues were cut. 8, the wall is a grave, necropolitics. It measures land in units of shallow ditches. We buried time capsules of unbroken bones. Justice auctioned her robes for body bags. We wove shrouds from the silk of undone nooses. 9, the wall is a school, indoctrination. It teaches orphans to curse their mothers' names. We homeschool them with grenade shrapnel alphabets. Justice burnt libraries to fuel her torch. We stored words in the hollows of children's ribs. Couplets of resistance, 25 to 32. They electrified the border, so we flew kites wrapped in a foil of ration tins. They poisoned the wells, so we drank from our own tears, distilled to medicine. They bombed the bakeries, so we baked bread from the yeast of our stubborn breath. They outlawed mourning, so we danced. The dabke at funerals, louder than warplanes. 10, the wall is a clock, temporal warfare. It sets its watch by our funeral processions. We reset each bomb crater with sundials. When Justice's statue was toppled in bronze, Gaza molded new ones from refugee tent clay. 11, the wall is a whisperer, psychological warfare. It hisses, you will forget, in our children's milk teeth. We bottle the scream of every demolished home. All monuments to cruelty share blueprints. See Berlin's graffiti, Johannesburg scars. Final line 77. The wall always falls where the exiled write. Suleiman Raja, 2025. There are two songs that follow to support the poem.
In the cold shadows of apartheid, where oppression's chains clinked with cruel precision, a light rose, fierce and undeterred, Steve Biko, a name echoing through the corridors of injustice. He was not just a man, but a movement. Black man, you are on your own. He declared against the paternalism of white liberals, against the division within his people, a call for self-awareness, for self-reliance, for unity in the face of fragmentation. They sought to silence him, issued a 5-year banning order, confined him to King William's Town, yet his spirit roamed free, igniting the Soweto uprising, drawing the attention of international eyes, from the US Senator to the UN diplomat. In the bleak cell of September 77, the state's narrative of a hunger strike crumbled before the truth of brutality, a traumatic brain injury delivered not by the absence of food, but by the hands of those who feared his voice, who feared the awakening he inspired. Autopsies turned into battlegrounds, doctors' words wielded like weapons, in courts where truth was a slippery shadow. Dr. Lang's highly incorrect certificate at Colonel Gooson's request, a testament to complicity, to fear. In those sterile chambers, no evidence of abnormality or pathology, they claimed, yet the ring marks on wrists, the brain damage, the thickened speech spoke louder than their falsified reports. In the back of a van, a 700-mile journey, frothing at the mouth, a testament to neglect, a journey from life to death. As the world watched in horror, as the autopsy revealed the lie, the state absolved the doctors, yet the truth persisted. A haunting reminder in the British Medical Journal, in the protests that followed, in the cries for justice that echo across borders. In 97, amnesty for the torturers, a grim acknowledgement by the Medical Association of a sad and disgraceful episode, believing the nation under attack. They betrayed the oath to heal. Steve Biko's death, a scar on the conscience of a nation, a reminder of the cost of truth in a land where justice was twisted.
Mais l'impérialisme est un mauvais élève. C'est un mauvais élève. Quand il est battu, quand il est renvoyé de la classe, il revient encore. C'est un mauvais élève. Il n'a jamais appris la leçon de
They
son
call you dictator when you dig your own gold. When you teach your children, suddenly you're too bold. America is screen danger, yeah, danger to who? Danger to masters who bled us for centuries through. We saw Libya burn, where's the freedom they promised? Zakata's blood cries, why is his vision still blocked? Lumumba's last words, they will never own us. Now Traore's turn, will we fight or get robbed?
Burkina Faso set Africa free. Burkina Faso break the oppressor's tree. Burkina Faso set Africa free. Burkina Faso break the oppressor's tree.
USA, pack your bags, take your drones out of sky. France, tell your troops the last plane said goodbye. No more chains wrapped in aid, no more crews rest as care. Africa's gold builds our schools, African hands guard African air. Boko Haram shadow, we know who brought the match. War on terror profits, same hands writing the checks. You feel Sankara spirit in every free meal, in every mine we own, in every gun we wield. Colonialism never left.
Just put on the suit, take a seat at the desk.
Debt traps for our cobalt, elections for the pawns. But Burkina's got the receipts, we remember the cost.
Burkina Faso set Africa free. Burkina Faso break the oppressor's tree. Burkina Faso set Africa free. Burkina Faso break the oppressor's tree.
USA, pack your bags, take your drones out of sky. France, tell your troops the last plane said goodbye. No more chains wrapped in aid, no more crews rest as care. Africa's gold builds our schools, African hands guard African air. Libya, heirs of the martyrs.
Burkina Faso, break the oppressor's tree.
The soil is our Bible. Our sweat is the prayer.
Burkina Faso, set Africa free.
Comrades,
General's lie.
the words of our poems and our songs record the true history. A final round of applause for Suleiman Raja.
Comrades, thank you very much for indulging. I have just two things I want to add to this, and I don't want it to be seen as a commercial aid, because it is not. One is that, with your permission, Roshan, a fundraiser for the, no, yes, that one. A fundraiser for the BDS Coalition. I have created this page on a site called Bandcamp, where all the other Palestinian music that I produced is available. All proceeds from sales of all the albums on that site goes directly to the BDS. So my appeal would be for you to spread this link throughout all your networks, where as many people as possible can make purchases. They can buy tracks, they can buy albums, they can buy multiple albums. It is not expensive, but all monies will be going directly to the BDS. Then I wanted to share another link. I'm not so sure. Yes, this is my YouTube page where all my music videos are available for download, and there is no cost to that. So please, if you'd like to explore a bit more, you can visit this page. I then just quickly want to go back to the poem. You may be wondering why it was written in 77 lines. I deliberately did that to make people understand that the Nakba is now in its 77th year. And the 77 lines of the poem actually signifies a line for each year of the Nakba. With that, I thank you very much for your attention.
Another round of applause for the comrades. Okay, so I kind of like that, right? Art as a pedagogical form of resistance is something that we need to think about more critically. Without wasting too much time, Rashan Dadu, it is you. Give her a round of applause while she comes up.
And while she comes up, I can read her biography quickly. Roshan is currently the national coordinator of the SABDS Coalition and a member of the Palestine Solidarity Campaign, PSC. She previously worked for a South African refugee and migrant rights organization and the Department of International Relations and Cooperation, DECO, where she served in the Middle East section of the South African Embassy in Algiers. So that's very critical because it means we've got a connection with DECO, and we, through Russian's intervention, can get some things done. Right, Russian? Prior to this, Russian grew up in exile and was an activist in the anti-apartheid movement and PSC UK. Her late father was Yusuf Dadu, who was also an anti-apartheid activist.
Technical issues. There we go. Thank you, comrades. It's hard to follow Comrade Soli's poetry and music, but I will try my best. I've called what I wanted to talk about Palestine solidarity for liberation, and I put from the global south, and then I realized what I really meant was from and in the global south, because taking what was said by the first speaker, that Palestine is everywhere, and trying to follow on from Prof. Valley's presentation on Palestine yesterday, I wanted to try and bring it up to date, but also to emphasize, as Samora Machel says, solidarity is not an act of charity, but mutual aid between forces fighting for the same objective. And I think that's crucial for us to bear in mind. Palestine is everywhere. When we're fighting our struggles, we're also in solidarity. And I also want to show how Palestinians are in solidarity with us. I don't want to show pictures of the horror that's going on there or repeat what Prof. Valley said yesterday about the utter devastation, the starvation. This was the last Gaza Health Ministry figures a month ago, the 24th of June. It's already way out of date. We know the real figures of people directly killed are enormous, and the starvation that's now setting in is another horrendous act of a war crime that's going unpunished. Israel's acting still with impunity. But I want to say again, solidarity is not an act of charity, but mutual aid between forces fighting for the same objective. And we know from yesterday, Zionism is an ethno-nationalist, white supremacist project that grew out of and hand in hand with racist colonial ideologies, synergized with patriarchal imperial interests, and that wasn't emphasized yet, how that synergy of patriarchy with colonialism and imperialism plays out. And then as Francesca Albanese, the Special Rapporteur for the Occupied Palestinian Territories, said in the report she's just published just this month, presented to the UN Human Rights Council, the report is called From the Economy of Occupation to the Economy of Genocide. And it says, it continues, this colonial racist ideology of Zionism continues as a mode of domination known as colonial racial capitalism. And in this report, which is pretty amazing for UN Special Rapporteur dealing with the Palestinian occupied territories, she's expanded her mandate, in a sense, to look at the very underpinnings of the economic underpinnings of the racial capitalist global system that Israel is part of. So taking the heed of Samora Machel's words, I want to look at the role of international solidarity in South Africa and Palestine. We heard yesterday about the interracial solidarity of the South African and Israeli apartheid regimes. But I want to focus on the necessity for global people-powered solidarity and through the strategy of boycotts, divestments, and sanctions. And to answer Comrade Vavi's question from the day before, yesterday, I'm losing track of time, what is to be done? And that means what is to be done in our own struggles in South Africa, in our continent, against apartheid, colonialism, and neo-colonialism, because they are inextricably tied to the Palestinian liberation struggle. So by mobilizing people's solidarity for Palestine, based on what I would call a politics of liberation, we are also fighting for our own freedom. And then just to say, Zionism equals colonialism, racism, and apartheid. Many examples were given by Prof. Valley of Cecil John Rhodes and the early beginnings and how these projects of Zionism, settler colonialism here and in Palestine were literally hand in hand. I mean, the guys knew each other and wrote letters and said, oh yeah, that's a good idea, let's try that here. But more recently, the first person I think more recently, or to call it apartheid, who said Israel, like South Africa, is an apartheid state, was not crazy solidarity activists in South Africa. It was actually the Prime Minister of apartheid South Africa, Hendrik Verwoerd. And given that he invented apartheid, he above all should know that what he's saying. So when he said that, as way back as 1961, I think it's a shame that it's taken up until 2022 for our government, for the United Nations, and for it to become a consensus that there is a system of apartheid that Israel operates to maintain its settler colonial project in Palestine. And then in 2023, Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, said, "We're facing monsters, monsters who murdered children in front of their parents. This is a battle not only of Israel against these barbarians, it's a battle of civilization against barbarism." And this is what he said since he started committing the genocide in Gaza. So I think, you know, in international law, to prove something is a genocide, it's not about the numbers of people killed. It's actually about stating the intent to get rid of a people in whole or in part. And I think it's pretty clear if the Prime Minister of Israel said that clearly, and that was also part of our case at the ICJ, they intend to ethnically cleanse, they intend to eliminate the people from Gaza and from the West Bank, because they're also, it was in the news this morning, every day there's increased atrocities in the West Bank, also bulldozing, not only raiding and making people to leave, but then destroying the homes, destroying everything that's there. But I also just wanted to mention that the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, which is our continental framework for human rights, mentions Zionism. In the preamble, it says, "Conscious of their duty to achieve the total liberation of Africa, the peoples of which are still struggling for their dignity and genuine independence, and undertaking to eliminate colonialism, neocolonialism, apartheid, Zionism, and to dismantle aggressive foreign military bases and all forms of discrimination, particularly those based on race, ethnic group, color, sex, language, religion, or political opinions." So I think it's interesting, especially given the way some African countries have been bought, particularly the authoritarian rulers, by Israel, that is actually in the charter that they have signed up to. So we can see that there has always been this connection between the anti-colonial struggles in our continent and in Palestine. And then I wanted to move quickly on. Somebody mentioned yesterday, nothing about us without us. And I think that's central to the Palestinian people's call for boycotts, divestments, and sanctions. It's actually 20 years since they made this call. And they consciously modeled it on the call we made in our struggle in South Africa when we called on the international community to boycott South African goods, on governments to impose sanctions, which took a long time, but ultimately they did. And I think that we need to remember that it's a Palestinian-led call. It's the majority, the vast majority of Palestinian civil society organizations that represents trade unions, they have land committees, women's committees, human rights organizations, also represents, in a sense, all of the political factions, because they all also have civil society organizations and sort of humanitarian organizations. So I think we could safely say it is a consensus, and in a way, a revolutionary instruction on the international community to take this action, because it's political action. It's taking action until Israel ends its occupation and colonization, recognizes the fundamental rights of Arab Palestinian citizens of Israel to full equality, and importantly, respecting, protecting, and promoting the rights of Palestinian refugees to return to their homes and properties as stipulated in UN Resolution 194. And that refers to the right to return to your home wherever it is in Palestine, whether it's in 48, whether it's in parts now of the West Bank, most of the population of Gaza were anyway refugees expelled during the Nakba from homes in what is now 1948 Israel. So moving very quickly on to the South African BDS targets, I think this is something that's very misunderstood. There's boycotts and there's consumer boycotts. The aim of consumer boycotts is obviously to get rid of all Israeli products. And we have Israeli products in our shops. But what we are saying is we need to target our boycotts. It doesn't make sense to just boycott everything, because where's the impact? You're never going to get a critical mass of people in South Africa where we're dependent because of our food insecurity and supply chains on a few number of shops. If we say boycott Discount, Clicks, Pick and Pay, Woolworths, boycott everything, where are we going to shop? And how many people are going to listen and understand why? We're not going to make any impact whatsoever. But if we say boycott Israeli products, not only does that mean you have to go into shops, it's not just ethical shopping, me personally saying, oh, I don't want to buy this or that. It means going into shops where you see Israeli products and taking on the shop, taking on the managers, explaining to the workers, talking to the customers why you're complaining, sticking stickers on the products, giving out leaflets. It's an active political action of boycott. And the advantage of that is you end up talking to people, explaining. So you have to know why. Why are we saying don't buy these products? You can't just have a whole long list and not be able to explain why. If we're telling people don't buy Coca-Cola, fine, we can explain it. Coca-Cola in Israel is, the factory is established on an illegal industrial settlement in the West Bank. Furthermore, for us in South Africa, Coca-Cola, the bottling company is CBC, the Israeli company that bought out Clover Dairies. So we have two reasons why we're calling on people in South Africa to boycott Coke. There's many alternatives that are cheaper as well, which is always handy if you're asking people not to buy a product. The other key global campaigns are McDonald's, Hewlett-Packard, Teva Pharmaceuticals, which we import from Israel, and I've mentioned Coke and Reebok, which is now sponsoring the Israeli football team after we campaigned successfully globally to stop Puma doing so. But we have to have a few targets, and we have to know why, and we have to be able to explain to people what those products why we're calling for a boycott of those products. Then the D in BDS is divestment. So I've mentioned Clover, and I think that's an important one because our government allowed an Israeli company to buy one of our biggest milk-producing companies. We fought with the unions, we worked with the unions to present cases to the Competition Commission Tribunal, which we lost. And we said, look, this is not going to be good for workers here. It's not going to be good for South Africa. If you allow an apartheid Israeli company that's exploiting the workers in Palestine on the illegally occupied West Bank, okay, they made a clause that said for 2 years there would be no job losses, there would be no changes to work conditions. As soon as that 2 years was up, jobs were cut, conditions were worsened, they wanted to close factories, move factories around the country. And so it's true, you can't have an apartheid company coming here and believe that it's going to be good for us. It's ridiculous. Anyway, that's Clover. Then we're looking into the PIC, where our pension funds are invested. The Norwegian pension fund is one of the hugest invested pension funds, has pulled out of investing in Israel because of people protesting and saying, we don't want our pension money to be invested. We're also exploring all the other investment companies like Old Mutual. We contacted them and then they didn't reply, and we put something on. It's amazing how companies respond to putting things on Instagram and social media. They get really freaked out. So then they met with us, and they actually were quite friendly, and they said, look, we agree with you. We don't want to be investing in Israeli. In fact, what we saw was in their end-of-year reports, they were investing in Elbit weapons systems. And they said, no, but it's not a direct investment. It's this whole complicated thing of investment trackers, and the money's moved around by algorithms, and we're looking to see how we can avoid, have an ethical thing in this tracking thing, investment tracking systems, so we avoid it. So we need to follow up with them. I've no idea if that's happened or not. And of course, the other big one here is universities. Universities around the world are invested in Israel. And we know the student protests that have happened in America and all over the place, the pushback from universities. Here, we've actually been pretty successful in that 5 universities have, in their Senate, adopted resolutions including an academic boycott, which is quite amazing because you have to vote, I think, in the Senate. So it means you have to win the argument with academics who are probably at best liberal and sit on the fence and aren't going to be very courageous, but nevertheless, in many cases, they have been won over to the idea of academic boycott. But some of the worst universities that have not are the formerly white ones. And what are they? WITS, there's UJ, there's UP, and UCT. And UCT, the Zionists are so hysterical that they've even taken to court, I think it's 70 academics who supported the academic boycott. They named them all in the court papers. They're absolutely insane. And I don't think they're going to get very far in that case. But there's a huge pushback in South Africa from the Jewish Zionist community and also the Christian Zionist. I wouldn't say it's a community, but it's part of the project of, in Africa in particular, of Israel, to promote this idea amongst Christians and churches, as I think Salim did mention yesterday, using a false theological argument, replacing Jesus with the state of Israel, and confusing people into thinking that we can't criticize Israel, that it's correct for the Jews to gather there, and this is what God wants, and we'll all be damned till eternity if this doesn't happen. And forgetting that Jesus, in fact, was, I would say, a communist. He stood on the side of the oppressed. I'm not a theologian or a religious person, but I think if you look at any of the Bible stories, you see Jesus was always the one that was there for the oppressed peoples. And I think if we look at Palestine, clearly it doesn't make any sense when there are Palestinian Christians and Muslims when the holiest sites for Christianity are also situated in Palestine. And the WCC has finally woken up and made a statement recently. But going back to the S of BDS, sanctions. Now, sanctions is something only governments can undertake, actually. So we have to put pressure on our government. Now, we've taken the case at the ICJ, as we all know, and that was amazing. I think that was a really bold move, and we should support it, and we shouldn't let that get thrown out in any way. Now we have Zionists in the GNU who sit in cabinet, and now we have Trump who's putting all this pressure on us. I mean, it's ridiculous, but, this so-called white genocide that is being used to put pressure on us to drop the ICJ case. But it is meaning that there's a reluctance on the part of our government to take any further action, and it's hypocritical because actually the obligations to sever relations comes from, in part, the ICJ case we have taken in the provisional measures, because the court, although they haven't ruled on the final substantive issue, they have in the provisional measures said it's the responsibility of all states, all third parties, to prevent and to punish possible genocide, plausible genocide. So the fact that we're selling coal to Israel, which goes into the Israeli electricity grid to fuel the military, fuel the illegal occupation, and as we speak, there's another shipment going. We can track the ships, and we've tracked the ships, and I'm not going to go into all of the details, but you can see the quantities. Colombia, who was the biggest exporter of coal to Israel, did declare, Gustavo Petro, the president, did declare coal embargo last year. And since then, the sale of South African coal has risen drastically, and you can see the ships on the ship tracking. Algoma Value is one, Cape Friendship is one, and very often they're the same ships carrying coal because there are sanctions busting companies in Colombia that Petro is now trying to deal with, carrying coal also from Colombia. And you can see the ship, literally, you can probably see it from Durban Harbour because it's Richards Bay Coal Terminal that it goes from. I was going to play this video, but I think that will take a little bit of time. So, as I said, why are we still doing this? We're actually contradicting ourselves, and it's an international legal obligation not to do so. This is just some of the statistics, and it's important to note that it's a very small amount of our coal. So it will not mean coal mines closing. It will not mean job losses. It will not affect negatively our economy, because it's less than 2% of our coal exports. And that will easily be absorbed because there are many other countries that also buy our coal, and our coal is in demand. And I don't know why the coal isn't being used here to fuel electricity. And on top of that, why there isn't an argument again being made around the just transition and how we can stop relying on coal altogether. but it really wouldn't have a negative effect on our economy. And then just to go back to Francesca Albanese's report, what she says is, while political leaders and governments shirk their obligations, far too many corporate entities have profited from the Israeli economy of illegal occupation, apartheid, and now genocide. The complicity exposed by the report is just the tip of the iceberg. And in the report, she names at least 50 companies, including Google and Amazon and Airbnb and Booking.com and Hyundai, and the companies that make the bulldozers that are destroying leveling, flattening Gaza at the moment, as well as many others. And she actually mentions in there South African coal sales to Israel and Glencore, the company. And that shows that the campaign is working because it's part of a global energy embargo campaign, and it would not have got into her report had there not been people around the world making submissions to her to say, you know, this is breaking the energy embargo that we should be having in place. And then I wanted to move on around that idea of the corporate complicity, because Glencore is not only selling coal to Israel. Glencore is also devastating communities. Just today, there's a signal group of Resist Glencore Network, and people in Peru, of all places, far up in the Andes, were posting that Glencore mines there, they employ private security, and now the private security is assassinating the people, similar to what we were hearing yesterday here, the people who are trying to protest the devastation of their lands, their ancestral lands of Glencore mines. And then in another instance where, and this is why I want to come to why our struggles are connected and why it's important for us to raise up each other's issues in our struggles. The question of Stilfontein, and I don't know if it's possible to play that minister in the presidency's comments, because I think, having thought about the statements of intent that Prime Minister Netanyahu made, I don't know if this will show and play, but let's try.
And then there was a question of whether we are going to send help underground to those Amazonas, South Africans.
Sorry. Was a step too far. I thought I could cope with the technology. Anyway, if you listen to what the minister in the presidency says when she made that famous comment in a press conference about we will smoke them out, what she's saying is we won't send food, we won't help them, they're all criminals, they're illegal, we're not going to help them, we leave them there. They must come out themselves from a mine shaft that is kilometers deep, that they cannot possibly do so.
Yeah, we're going to smoke them out. And then there was a question of whether we are going to send help underground to those Amazonas, South Africans. You want us to send help to criminals? You want us to send help to criminals, honestly? We are not sending help to criminals. We are going to smoke them out. They will come out. We are not sending help to criminals. Criminals are not to be helped. Criminals are to be persecuted. We didn't send them there. And they didn't go down there for the good benefit or good intentions of the Republic. So we can't help them.
She goes on. We've all heard it. And I think if we don't take heed, it's exactly, if we don't pay attention to what's happening in Palestine and what's happening here and how similar these kind of statements of intent are, what is illegal about, you can't say people are illegal. These are working people trying to scritch a living in really harsh conditions from mines that were built on the land that was theirs anyway in the first place. So Glencore, who commits all of these atrocities all around the world, is legal mining, and yet people whose land it is mining is illegal mining. Again, in the DRC, it's the same. Glencore is one of the biggest culprits. And if you look at the state of informal mining there, it's atrocious. But what is wrong with it? Why is it illegal? What's illegal and who's illegal? And can anyone be illegal? And so in getting involved with the campaign that grew up around the Stilfontein miners, the trap miners, they're called Visual Intifada. They made these posters from Gaza to Stilfontein, trying to make that connection graphically, visually, just to show that if we tolerate what's going on in Palestine, we're not only going to be next, it's already happening here. And so that was just one example of linking our struggles. And so when there were protests around that, Palestine Solidarity activists got involved. And here again, just the former defense minister, both Netanyahu and this former minister Gallant have an ICC warrant of arrest out on them, by the way. And he says, I've ordered a complete siege on the Gaza Strip. There will be no electricity, no food, no fuel. Everything is closed. We are fighting human animals and we are acting accordingly. So similar. I mean, you could almost swap what Chavezi said with what Gallant said. Smoke them out. So that was one example. Another example of where Palestine solidarity action intersects with struggles on the ground was the Abu Khlali protests against Operation Dudula last week. And I think I've got some pictures when I've finished speaking. I'll just put them up. And I think that's another powerful example of how the Palestine and the fascism that Dudula represents, and we heard about that from Abu Khlali yesterday, how it's not, they're like the foot soldiers, they're the thugs on the streets, but where is the real power? What is a minister like Gayton Mackenzie doing, being a minister, a gangster who whips up this kind of hatred against what people deem foreigners, whatever that really means, particularly in our continent. And then just to go back to Stilfontein, so in getting involved with that struggle, then the Palestinian Trade Union Federation contacted us and said, what's going on? What is happening there? Because if you had taken this case against genocide at the ICJ, why are you massacring people underground like this, your government? And they sent a statement of solidarity to the Stilfontein miners and the community there. So that's, what Michelle is saying. It's not charity, it's not one way, it's not, oh, we feel sorry for people over there. It's literally being in struggle together, and even in spite of facing the genocide that they are, they were equally concerned to express their solidarity here. And that happened also when the Clover workers, after the Israeli company that bought out Clover started making these job cuts, making redundancies and changing worsening the working conditions. Again, Palestinian trade unions were in solidarity with the Clover workers here because it was the same struggle. They're working there in the West Bank on their occupied territories, exploited by the very same company that now workers here, particularly when they were on strike, and Palestinian trade unionists joined online to mass meetings and sent messages of solidarity to the Clover strikers. So I've mentioned the mining affected communities, and finally the action committees. I think, again, it's those kind of connections that Push for Palestine is also involved in mobilizing and organizing with the comrades that are here who are working within the informal settlements and resisting the repression and oppression that they are facing. So again, you see how we need to build the solidarity around the strategic BDS demands, but in solidarity with each other within South Africa and with the people of Palestine, Congo, and oppressed people everywhere, as Samora Michelle said. And then there were just a few pictures. This was a recent Global Day of Action against Glencore. Many comrades were there. We had these big masks, and each of them has the name. One is Jill Marcus, of the Glencore CEOs and former CEOs, all of whom are South African, shamefully. They also disrupted the AGM of Glencore on that day, which takes place in Switzerland in their big global headquarters, and you could see the South African Jill Marcus and Gary Nagel just sitting there silently, saying nothing, whilst people are raising up their issues in disrupting the meeting in order to raise up their issues. And that was just a few more pictures of that, which comrades will remember. That was from the Abakhlali protest. There's Operation Dudula. Maybe I can just... 2 minutes. There's no time. But I want to end with the Abakhlali comrades standing firm and holding the line against this provocation of these fascists on the streets. And I think finally, just upcoming action, on the 21st of August, we're protesting at the Department of Trade and Industry in Pretoria, also in Durban at the office here, and Cape Town. So get involved, keep informed, and hopefully we'll see you at the next protest. Just before, if I've got half a minute to say, I think it's important that we remember these marches and protests, and that's our history, that's our history of resistance. And so, you know, we do a protest and maybe people forget and so on. But when you look back, and if there was more time, there were some brilliant videos featuring some of the comrades in this room. I think it's important to keep reminding ourselves that we're part of a history of resistance alongside the Palestinian people. And however desperate it is and however depressed we feel about the situation, if the Palestinian people are still resisting, through armed struggle, through all forms of struggle, through simply existing is a form of resistance in Palestine, then I think we need to continue and use that to mobilize ourselves and not to mourn. Thank you.
Okay, another round of applause. Comrades, time is not on our side. Just some direction from you, Sajida.
We're going to connect with somebody in France via Zoom, so I've told her that we're running a bit late. So can I ask if we can take a 10-minute tea break, because we started 20 minutes late. We're trying to catch up the time that we lost this morning, right? But if we, and then we'll bring their tea into the room. Yes, people can bring their, if you can go and collect your tea and bring it in the room, I'll speak to the caterers, and so 10 minutes to go fetch your tea and come back. Yeah. Please be disciplined, because we're connecting with somebody via Zoom, and I don't want to keep her waiting. Thank you very much.
que Montréal, c'est tout le temps, il faut bien, vraiment, les vallées sont encaissées, donc les voies ne profitent même pas. Vous avez quoi?
Inkanyezi ebusuku bami fanane langi futhumalo yami dali mina ngisasiboni thanda omunye ongwene bawelethiyo Inkanyezi ebusuku bami fanane langi futhumalo yami dali mina ngisasiboni thanda omunye
Thank you for being very timely. Is our comrade ready? Do you want to introduce? Do you want to take the session?
Yeah, okay.
Hello? Hello?
We are here, can hear you.
Hello? Hello?
Hi, we can hear you.
Do you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah.
Huria.
Yes? Yes.
It's Sajida. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
We're running a bit late, as I said, so I'm going to let you start, and I'll share your bio with the group later. Is that fine?
Can you repeat?
I was supposed to introduce you now.
Yes.
But if you can just say a little about yourself and then continue, because we're running a bit late.
Yes, I'm going to yes. The proposition is that I talk now.
Yes.
This is what I understand.
Yes.
Okay.
But introduce yourself. Tell them a little about you before you start your presentation.
Yes, I am a decolonial activist in France. I am from my background is I'm from Algeria, and I am what we call here in France a post-colonial subject in France, and I'm fighting in the decolonial movement in Paris.
You can continue with your presentation, Huria.
Yes. I would like to say how sorry I am not to be with you today. The reason is that the French court have summoned me in connection with a complaint of anti-Semitism because I am an anti-Zionist activist in France. The most racist and reactionary political forces are currently at work to prevent any solidarity with Gaza. France is currently, along with Germany and the United States, one of the most active countries in its support for Israel's genocidal policy, which is normal because France was and remains a great colonial power. However, I am delighted to be taking part in this decolonial winter school, just as I am delighted that these initiatives are multiplying. The decolonial movement in France, to which I belong, has also just organized its decolonial summer school in Paris. It was entitled Thinking About Power and Hegemony with Fanon and Gramsci, and was attended by over shows that the public's expectations of the colonial movement are enormous, and above all, that the decolonial movement worldwide must become part of the solution. That's why it's important to strengthen international coalitions. I see this winter school as part of that ambition. Having said that, and thanking you in advance for listening, I would like to turn to the subject of whether the fight against anti-Semitism is a priority in times of genocide. First of all, I would like to make it clear that I'm speaking from France. I wouldn't say the same thing if I lived in Algeria, the country of my birth. My answer, hello, you listen to me?
Huria, can you repeat what you just said?
Can you listen, hear me?
Can you just repeat? Can you please repeat what you just said? You just got cut off a bit.
Okay. I don't know where I was cut. Hello?
Your topic. You started with your topic. Now continue from after you started with your topic.
Okay.
You can continue.
Yes. Having said all that, and thanking you in advance for listening, I would like to turn to the subject of whether the fight against anti-Semitism is a priority in times of genocide. First of all, I'd like to make it clear that I'm speaking from France. I wouldn't say the same thing if I lived in Algeria, the country of my birth. So I am speaking from the heart of the empire, and that changes everything. My answer will therefore be a dialectical one. First, no, then yes, and then no again. Let me explain. Palestine is a land that has been colonized since 1948, and its people are a martyred people. At present, despite the denial of the Western political class, the Palestinian people are being subjected to genocide. As we speak, Gaza is starving. The Palestinians are starving. So there is no doubt the priority is not the fight against anti-Semitism or any other racism, not even Islamophobia, which has been the main state racism in France for 20 years. The priority is the fight against Zionism. It is international solidarity. It is the affirmation of the Palestinian people's right to resistance, and it is the rejection of this rhetoric of Israel's right to defend itself, when it is the main aggressor and its leaders are genocidal. However, I have just taken part in a collective book entitled Against Anti-Semitism and Its Exploitation, which came out last October. Why write a book against anti-Semitism when, as I've just told you, my priority is to support the Palestinians who are the first victims, not the Jews? Because we are in France, at the heart of the empire, because we are campaigning in a country that is not only complicit in genocide, but also a country that is the architect of Zionism, a country that has helped to make Israel the policeman in the Arab region. But above all, because the balance of power is against us and the dominant ideology presents the Jews as victims. So if we are to effectively defend the Palestinians when we are crushed by the dominant ideology that presents the Jews and as the first victims, we must first and foremost deconstruct the discourse on the Jews and fight against the weaponization of anti-Semitism. This is becoming a priority for us. We know that it was this weaponization that precipitated the downfall of Jeremy Corbyn, the leader of Britain's pro-Palestinian labor movement. In writing this book, our aim was to protect the political forces in France that support the Palestinian cause. We had to anticipate the use of anti-Semitism to strengthen us, knowing that in France, unlike in Italy or Germany, there is a real political force on the anti-racist and international left, even if this left remains timid about its internationalism. You have to realize that the French left is very white in the political sense of the term. Historically, the French left has always supported colonialism, and I would say that overall, the French proletariat is a corrupt proletariat, in the sense that it has historically supported the colonial enterprise and has profited like it, corrupt. That's why it is important to support this new left, which is pro-Palestinian. Also, putting the fight against anti-Semitism and its weapons in solidarity with the Palestinian people. The other reason is that You can't fight anti-Arab or anti-Palestinian racism if you don't fight anti-Semitism. The decolonial struggle doesn't choose its racisms. It fights Islamophobia. Because all modern racisms have to have the same colonial matrix. Since race is a product of Western modernity, no racism can be dissociated from the others. The genocide of the Jews didn't begin during the Second World War, of which the Germans. Hitler was a great admirer of the United States, which was based on the genocide of the Amerindians, about the genocide of the autochthones. They were the long history of Western genocides. That's why it is important not to isolate anti-Semitism or the genocide of the Jews as Westerners do. That's why our work consists of reintroducing the Jews into history rather than making them into a people excluded from history, whom the peoples of the world would hate by nature, who would be persecuted by nature. So it is not coincidence that the title of my contribution to the book I quoted above is Give Back Jews to History or the End of Innocence. It means restoring the Jews' history or the end of innocence. For me, it was a question of making anti-Semitism intelligible and turning it into a form of racism like any other in colonial history. We must reject the exceptionalization of the Jews that would exonerate them from both victims and executioners, depending on historical circumstances. Finally, the last reason why it is very important to put anti-Semitism at the heart of our struggle is that it is the persistence of the Jewish question and anti-Semitism in Europe that makes Jews choose Zionism. For me, Zionism is a form of alienated dignity for the Jews. The European nation nations. The result is that Jews remain non-whites in the heart of the West, and anti-Jewish racism has been cosmetically transformed. In Europe, we have gone from accepted anti-Semitism to philo-Semitism. The state pretends to love Jews, but never turns them into perfect white citizens. All it does is use them to further its colonial policy. This is why, from the point of view of the French colonial state, a good Jew is a Zionist Jew, and a good Jew is an Islamophobic and Negrophobic Jew. It should be noted that since 7 October, while the French and Germans claim to love the Jews for the first time since 1945, they have begun to persecute anti-Zionist Jews who are perceived as bad Jews. This is why most French Jews feel existentially insecure. This is why they become Zionists. They think they need a national home because they will never be at home in Europe. All this to say that to fight effectively for the liberation of Palestine, we must fight for the liberation of the Jews. In this respect, the fight against anti-Semitism in Europe is becoming a priority. Jews must be convinced that their future is possible in Europe, provided they fight to dismantle the French racial state. And this applies to all the victims of racism in France: Blacks, Muslims, Roma people, Jews. In other words, we need to de-Zionize the Jews by offering them, de-Zionize the Jews by offering them a desirable alternative that the white world is unable to offer them. What the white world has offered them is a colonial project, Israel, which is created both to defend its interests and to get rid of its own Jews. To conclude, I would say that despite this development, it's clear to me that Palestine remains the priority. But what I am proposing here is a dialectical way of serving the Palestinian cause, but more than dialectical, a human way of serving it. It means without harming anyone and taking into account both the Jewish condition and the Palestinian question, which in a way will only find solutions in both causes if both causes are resolved. This is what I call a politics of revolutionary love in a book I wrote in 2016. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Huria. If you can stay on a little while longer, we'll take questions now. For Nelson, you here.
No, I'm very, very sorry. I have to take a train. I have to run right now.
That's fine,
I'm
Huria.
very, very sorry. But I can, if you give me the questions, I can try to respond by email, and then you can say my answers to the public.
Okay. Great. Will you send me your presentation? Email me your presentation.
Yes, I sent it. I sent it.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Good luck. Good luck for everything.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Khwetsi. Okay, we can go off now. Khwetsi. Where's Khwetsi? Where is she? Oh, okay. Nelson, can we take questions for Nelson's presentation? I'll just facilitate until she gets back. So I'm sure you all have lots of questions to ask Nelson. And while he's here, we have to make the most use of him because he normally is here from day one, but this year he hasn't been able to. And we forgive him because it's the Frantz Fanon Centennial, and he's been going around the world to events that are commemorating Frantz Fanon. So questions for Nelson, please. Oh, okay. Here, and then here.
Hi. It's not a question, but just an affirmation of what you were saying earlier. Was the fact that in our constitution in 1996 confirmed the right of private property in section 25, the right of private property or private property rights to those who supposedly own the property. But what it actually confirmed was the legalization of the theft of the land and dispossession of the indigenous people in this country. So it's very interesting that the new democratic South Africa was actually based on the colonization of land and the affirmation of that dispossession. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Thank you for your input. It was most interesting. On the question of frontiers of racism and colonialism, I'd like your comments on Australia, New Zealand, Canada, the Five Eyes project where there's intelligence sharing and so on and so forth. Because if you look at it, there's a consistency there, and all of them are settler colonial endeavors. Thank you.
Anyone else with a question?
Yeah, thank you. Mine is not a really question, but that's a provocative argument. because I hear you say he's going around for centenary of Frank Fanon. And I was wondering, we as Africans, Frank Fanon, of course we embrace his ideology, but he is also one of those guys like a Trump, despite the different in ideology. My question is, when should we or can we have a different idea, political idea, economical idea, social idea that differs from all those whom we call philosopher of politics, Fanon, Marx, and others? Why can't we have a model of a system of our own instead of referring to these people who maybe their time is not according to our time? Of course, we may refer to them, but when we look into things, you'll find we are not together with them in our fight. Yes, we took some of their idea, but I totally sometimes differ with them. And that's why I'm developing an idea of saying communitarism ideology. That politics that is deep-rooted from the community themselves and not just Fanon, Marx, and all those things. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anybody else with a question? Comrade?
No, thanks. Well, I'm going to quite move from an excited position around your commemoration of Frantz Fanon. And I don't want to take it beyond that, but also keeping his ideals and values and his convictions alive. I'm a bit crippled, but it's fine. I take note of that, and one welcomes that very well, and I think it's an important part of work that you do, we should follow and we should continue to embrace. I follow you very well with your relations, the USA, SA, and the Palestinian. I, however, missed you at some point, and probably will help me. I'm clear on the principles, I'm clear on the religion as a mode of setting the basic rules for argument's sake of societies as and when they were being distracted and rebuilt. I missed you, probably it was my lack of concentration and focus on humanism. I think you said something about Meniken, I didn't get you well. Help me. Yeah, if they get me, it means you get me too. And you talk more about the goodness and the evilness thereof. So I would like you to just please, by a line, go back to that particular aspect. And more, to give more context and clarity thereof. One question probably, and I'll sit down. It then borders, I suppose, to clear why we find the USA where it is with regard to the Palestinian question. If you know what I mean. I mean, we know that the USA is in full support of Israel. And we know where they draw the excitement. But you were drawing some similarities. I don't know how likely would that help me comprehend with the relation, the US, the SA, and the Palestinian. I do understand where likely you intended to end, and I'm going to give you. I can give you.
Sorry. Thank you. Can we get responses before we take a few more hands?
I think, yeah, I don't know whether it was a question or a comment.
No, it's fine.
But I think, can we please keep our questioning short, because we started late this morning and we are trying to catch up with time. So, I know people want to share comments, but if you want to comment on the presentation, yes, do so. Keep it short. And if you want to ask a question, ask it.
Okay, we're going to get a...
We try. Just for the sake
Okay,
of
what
others who
is
may
the
be
qu-
tempted to do what
Okay,
I do.
thank you.
We try our best to
Thank you.
put proper context and meaning of our questions so that we get the best answers we can. You know, I've made this point yesterday, that it is not fair for us to have a presentation, take notes, have the proper context, and when we have to ask the question, we are made to wait for 4, 5, 6 hours. And then to come back and ask a question on a presentation that happened 3, 4, 5 hours back. So I'm making a plea again, that when we struggle to construct our line and our articulation of the question is not deliberate, we may sound repeating ourselves, facilitator, but it's important that we be given a degree of tolerance in trying to put a constructive as possible.
Thank you, comrade. Thank you, comrade.
Please.
Comrade, I take your point. Previously, we had, in the past winter schools, we didn't have enough time for discussion. So that is why I said, we could ask questions and answers after each presentation, but then they're very short and limited, and the participants don't get a chance to engage and participate. So this year I tried a different approach because, yes, usually there's question and answers after each presentation. So Nelson, yeah. Yes. Do you want to respond before Khwaitsi takes any more? But thank you for the response and the critique of the way the school is structured.
Thanks for the questions. Let me go one by one. About these other frontiers in Canada, Australia, New Zealand. I mean, first off, wherever Europe extended, right, that was the frontier originally. So the frontier were also occurring in so-called Latin America, in the Caribbean. Maybe that was the first frontier of the expansion. So in a way, everywhere they are, right? And I think it's important to look at them. What I'm doing is that to identify, like in the 21st century, like when I look at these projects, with this project in particular, remember I was making the comparison with Frederickson. He was looking at the 20th century. Looking at the 21st century, it seems that, again, when you look at Israel and the US, there are frontiers that are having right now a global impact. Right? So I'm kind of focusing on them because of that kind of impact. The frontier experiments taking place in other places, and in a way in some others, because it has been some time, right? It has coalesced into some forms of politics, right, which are colonial and so on. But in the US, because of the global role that it has and the power, it has become like unseasoned engineering, always in the frontier. That's why it makes it such an important case. And because it has played a role into imagining what is the nation state to begin with, right, since the US Revolution. The case of Palestine, clearly, since 1948, being, some people say Palestine is the last colony of that imperial project. And so it remains to be highly illuminating because it's taking place, the control of the land and the genocide is playing now live every day. And the whole globe is involved. Right? It's been done with the support of the US and Western powers. So it's not only an isolated case, it seems to be touched, right? Now, the question about South Africa, then why South Africa? In this case, I think South Africa represents, and this goes to one of the questions, right? How is South Africa in this triangle? I think it represents a crucial, and why this belongs in this triangle, right? Crucial element, different from the other two though, because it is the place, this experiment, where you have large majority of black people with very, very minor group of whites, yet they have the economic dominance, right? Is the experiment whether you can maintain white supremacy and you can maintain a structure of coloniality even when the large demography is against you, right? So how do you engineer a state when even the large majority are black, yet the principles of coloniality remain? in the US is fighting to keep white majority, right? The whole thing, Trump phenomenon, is because they are losing demographic majority. Is being projected by 2050, Anglo-Saxon whites will no longer be the majority in the US. Therefore, this is the moment to push them, immigrants out, 65 million immigrants, to reorder the country so that everybody aligns. And whoever remains, they know how they need to behave, right? That's the case. In Israel, in the state of Israel and in Palestine, what you see is the effort, because the population is more or less half and half, and they want to make sure that they have, and it was clear from the beginning, they need a majority Jewish state. They want a majority Jewish state, right? So they need to engineer a state where they keep the majority. And right now, if they just democratize one state, they are not necessarily there, it's like half and half. So that's the project, how to create a state with a so-called democracy. But democracy is not so difficult to maintain when you secure the majority of a population, because you know that the outcomes are going to be in a particular direction. So they need to have this kind of racial democracy working there. In the case of South Africa, it's a different game, because they lost the demography. Whites lost the demography game. So the question is, because they are really very minor group, but how do you maintain? This is the South African Republic and the so-called democracy project. How do you still maintain that nation as part of the interstate nation of colonial power, based on coloniality? And how do you maintain white power and white privilege in that, even when the majority is black and even when there are black leaders governing, right? That's the unique part, and I think that that's what makes these three places entangled. They are avoiding, Israel and the US, avoiding being like South Africa, right? Where they are run out. But South Africa is providing what happens if they lose majority. Well, South Africa is the experiment. How do you still maintain it? And that's the importance of looking critically at the constitutions and so on. And that's which also leads to the question, when now we see that South Africa is accusing Israel of genocide and is taking Israel to the International Court of Justice, yet it is and remains conqueror South Africa. Right? It is and remains a South Africa that is still built on the principles of coloniality. So that's also part of the importance of having South Africa there, right? That we go beyond this notion that South Africa is completely opposite to Israel because it's taking Israel to the International Court of Justice. At the end, you don't have to think much to see that they are the same fundaments are being maintained in both places. So that is the, let's say, strategic importance of having these three places. But of course, we should not limit, we should not end there. But I think there is something to learn by counterposing these three places. I hope that connects with that. And I know the time is short, maybe I can add the Manichaean. There is the Manichaean Marx, Fanon. Let me say something about Fanon. Maybe the Manichaean we can talk outside because I don't want to respond. But, I think that is important. I would not put Fanon in a list like that necessarily with Marx and maybe other theories and so on and so forth. I don't think that they necessarily belong there together, even though I'm not saying that there are connections and affinities. And I would also warn us to develop an anti-intellectualistic position, right? Where somehow writers and theoreticians who have contributed to the struggle, now we need to leave them out because they are. To begin with, Fanon is not one of those. And then to follow, we, I think, should claim the contributions of our ancestors, of others who have preceded us. And Fanon, we read it not simply because it's Fanon and so on, but there is something about the time he lived in that context where Europe, for the first time since 1492, it is now unveiled to the world as a place of contradiction and of a place of problems because of the Holocaust and the Second World War. Fanon is there. And that is like the king no longer has clothes, because you see that even in the heart of Europe, you see fascism, you see genocide. Fanon was part of that generation that saw Europe and saw it naked. While then in the colonies, people were preparing their pens and their guns to fight for independence and the struggle. And he participated in that struggle from the ground up, not simply from the academia, right? Not simply writing from a desk, reading Marx and applying Marx. He was with communities, right? He was a veteran in the Second World War. He joined the war, and then he joined the Algerian Liberation Front. And even when he was criticizing, he was calling attention to African, North African, and West African forms of community gathering and solidarity and thinking. So he will want you to build the communitarian, but I don't think that you have to do it against Fanon. I think that Fanon is and actually I don't think that you have to do it in an intellectualistic. You though have to select well who your readings are and what ancestors you're going to hold close to your heart. And I think that Fanon remains one of our combatant and wisest ancestors. That doesn't mean that you have to select that doesn't mean that you have to accept everything. I don't think that we will accept everything of anyone. Anyway, right? Difference and so on, but that doesn't mean that you're going to ignore them because you don't agree with anything.
Thank you, Nelson. Comrade Saj, do we have round for more okay. One more question?
Thank you. Prof, I caught your entire presentation online, so well done to our IT comrades because it came through very clearly. I really like your notion of the Christendom principles, and I wanted to ask you about this idea that the modern state system is meant to be based on the separation between church and state. But the question is that really the case? When we look at, for example, how a lot of our sort of, Western states actually function, and they claim that, they are not driven by any of these so-called religious principles and so on, and some of the examples that you gave. So can we actually claim that in terms of how the decoloniality, or rather the colonial project functions, there is actually the separation between church and state? Thank you.
One more question. Excuse.
Thank you. Okay, my name is Musa. Maybe I'll just extract from the presentation and then ask a more abstract question. It seems like this is a theme across the presentations that certain forces are united on their agenda, and it's quite clear what the agenda is. But we get caught up on, I don't like Zuma, I don't like Malema, and so I can work with this agenda. I don't like that one guy in Operation Tutula and all of that. So how do we go beyond the interpersonal preferences and make the agenda a little bit more stronger than who we like and who we don't, so that we know which purposes are worth fighting for, even if we unite with people we don't think we like? Because it sounds like what the Global North is doing is exactly that. Thank you.
Thank you. Would you like to respond to that?
I can say something quick about, Thank you. Well, with regard to the second point, I would just say that that's the problem or the issue that you're pointing out. I think that called for highlighting the importance of collective formation and collective decision making and collective orientation and collective education. Because then you look at the word not simply whether, it's a matter of personal preference, whether you like the tone of this or whether you like this. First off, you realize when you are in a collective that everyone has contradictions. There's no perfect political leaders and so on. But when you are in a collective, then you can all together figure out what are the contradictions that you're going to accept and what is the red line, right? And those are decisions that are taken together. What strategical decisions you need to make when you support and when you shift all of that together. And then it's not a question of personalism, but it's thinking collectively, right, about politics and other matters. And when that moment comes to think about, to analyze and do a strategy, that's where all of the concepts that we're discussing here and all these ideas can play a factor. They give us tools to think of reality, and then in the hope that when the moment comes, we make the right strategic decisions. But even that is not perfect, right? That's part of the ongoing struggle. And second, with the church and state, maybe the main issue is the following, that there is clearly, however, so the church, this difficult depending on what you're talking, what part of the world you're talking. But as much influence as it can have the church these days, I think that is still, one could say that it's probably qualitatively different from when in Christendom, right? The church had this absolute authority, and so it was indispensable. And the church, with all the power that it may remain to it, it has been very subordinated, and it has had to fight for its existence, right, to legitimize. So even in the 19th century, Christian theologians, changed their tune to trying to prove to the secular West that the West did not need to abolish or to completely eradicate Christianity. They need to make the case, right? And so that was a complete scenario. Now, different scenario. In places like the US, and this is the point about the US coloniality, it had a closer connection. But now with the institutionalized church, because this is a Protestant setting, but with this Christian faith. So the idea of the nation under God and so on, all that connection with a particular religiosity, Christian religiosity, explains the sacralization of politics in the US. And therefore, then you find the case of Israel, right, where that is even stronger. And so you have a form of coloniality that is less secularistic, certainly that we have imagined. But I don't think that then should be said that the church is the one in power. No, it's a combination of religious, secular combination of coloniality, I think.
Thank you. We're going to move on to the next presenter. Laudi, can I ask you to make a comment before lunch? Great, thank you. Comrades, we are now, remember yesterday, some presentations didn't happen, etc. So this is the session where we're going to make up for that, because presenters have prepared and they are here to present. Right now, we are going to please give a round of applause to the ones that have just asked questions and presented. Great, and I'm going to invite Nonhle Mbutuma and Daniel Radebe to please share with us.
I've been asked to introduce while they woke up. Ngoba kwenye umuntu wasemampontweni kuthiwa impondo endlini meli mthutha. So Sis Nonhle Mbutuma is from the Amadiba Crisis Committee, which since 1997 has been involved in a long, protracted fight for and with the people of that Amadiba region, from the border with KZN all the way to the Mthentu River, against two things, and she will say if there's more, but the N2 is being developed down through the Eastern Cape, along the coast. And part of that is to go through the Amadiba territory. The second is the discovery of titanium in that region. And we know this, we normally say Xolobeni, it's in fact a number of villages where they've discovered this and what that would mean for the people there if it was mined. Gwede Mandashe has his sights set on Sis Nontle and the committee, and her work has been to resist that. Sis Nontle, like the fellows from Abahlali Basemjondolo, is under great threat for her life because of the courage and the courageousness to continue to speak out against monopoly capital. I'm not going to call it white. Yeah, we might, it is, but it's also a particular form of blackness in its operation. So we are grateful for her to join us despite the threat. When you're inviting people to come to Durban, this is where the killing happens in this province. So we're glad you're still alive. Thank you.
Afternoon, colleagues. I think my job is just to guide the whole conversation, because we spoke briefly with her is just to give you an orientation of who is Madiba Crisis Committee and how many villages are there. And the other issue which is important is that probably to share with the comrades that are here, her strategy is quite different, because she's using the very same tools that we were given, the court system, because villages are quite displaced in distances. And I think it will be important for her to engage with other comrades, and how did she be able to sort of use the very same tool, which is this constitution, because I know, Comrade Vavi was saying, his brother is delusional about the constitution, but she has been able to use the very same constitution to challenge the very same state that is really troublesome for them as Amatiba Crisis Committee. And I think we'll start the conversation with her just to introduce herself and introduce that Amatiba Crisis Committee is not just an organization, it's different villages that are combined with this issue of them being displaced in their own land, because it's not about titanium only, Prof. Hugo. It's also about Ugu District Municipality, which has an interest in that area. It also has the Eastern Cape, Premier has their own interest in that area. And those are some of the challenges that I think she's faced with. I think I will hand over to you, Sis Nontle, just to give just an overview of Amatiba Crisis Committee.
Is it working? Okay. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to be part of this gathering today. And first of all, I just want to apologize of being late. I'm sure people, they were seeing my name on the program, but I was not appearing. The reason is the struggle. That's why I didn't come. The struggle that we're facing is too much pressure. It didn't give us time to breathe. First of all, Amatiba Crisis Committee was formed in 2007 by the community. Amatiba is one of the areas where they were being called homelands during the Bantustan. This is where we were based. We are under communal land, where the land is being managed or organized in a collective way. Nobody's taking their own decision alone. We are taking a decision together. We are many villagers, which is scattered, as maybe you have an example of how the communal land look like. But there's a good life there, no matter how scattered. And there's a good life, there's peace, which is very important. When you're a human being, you need peace. That is why we defended that peace, to have it for longer time, because in order to have a future generation, we need peace in ourselves. Now, when we try to live in that area, we just find that after 1994, we were being told that 13% of land is owned by the majority of South Africa. That means 87 is owned by individuals, which is few. Now we're hoping that that talk of the land reform is going to be fulfilled. But unfortunately, 1996, just 2 years after democracy, there were a group that coming to our community that they told us that they discovered titanium, and where we have our livelihood, where we have our graves. You know, we are spiritual people. We believe that, which is recognized by our constitution. But all that, it was not matter. We've been told that they are here to develop us. That's where we start questioning, what is development? But when we start questioning development, that's where we put ourselves in trouble. Because those so-called developers or investors, they don't want to be questioned. And they don't have time to answer those questions. Instead, they just push our communities and they just intimidate us, because our state use police as brutality to our communities. When we start questioning, they said that people need development. But who are these people that they need development? If us that they said they are here to develop, but we are still questioning development, why development is always been imposed to our people? Those were questions that we're asking. But we keep pushing, no matter how it was so difficult, especially in the rural areas, because we are so scattered, and most of the time we are not so well organized as an organization. That is why Amadiba Crisis Committee has been formed, because it was quite difficult to gather together, because the capitalists, they love so much to find our communities far apart each other, because it's easy to go through. Now, we formed Amadiba Crisis Committee in order to be organized. Now, when we do that, that is where Amadiba Crisis Committee were being attacked, where our chairperson, he was being assassinated, because when you've been organized, you make their lives difficult. The best way is just to do assassination amongst yourselves in order to be scared and back off. Unfortunately, we didn't back off, we continue. But there's too many things. Not only titanium. I will try to cut it short. Oh, okay. I'm always worried about time, especially when it's about lunch. I don't want to stand. Okay. Yeah, there's too many issues or too many mega projects. You know, when these investors, they come, always have their own plans, which the plans you are not being informed. Because for us, we just only know one thing, which is titanium. And we're asking, what is this titanium to do with us? Because we eat sweet potatoes, we eat terrariums, we eat corn, we eat fish, you know. What this, you know, they said, no, you are going to be developed and you're going to get jobs. But we are self-employed. We employed ourselves. The sweet potatoes that we grow, the terrariums that we grow, we feed the market. They said, no, your community is the poor of the poorest. You know, we've learned that investors or invaders, because we call them invaders anyway, when they come to invade your space, they just make sure that they brainwash your mind in order to undermine what you have and expect what you don't know. That's what they were doing to us. But we didn't buy that agenda. We told them that this agenda of yours, it's not good for our future generation. We're not going to allow the mining, because mining is a short term. And mining is going to destroy or cut the future generation short. Now we're not going to allow that. In order to do that, we go all the way to court. We use our constitution as a tool to defend our land. And luckily, I always say that as South Africans, we still need to pray that our judicial system must not be co-opted by the politicians. Because once your judicial system is owned or is controlled by the politicians, because politicians are becoming agents of the private sector or of the colonial system. Now, that's where we won the first case in 2018, that the communities have a right to consent, which was the biggest case in South Africa, where we were given that in terms of development, as communities, we need to give a consent. And again, our own government appealed that decision because they don't believe that people have a right to decide what is good for them. What is good must always come from the top. But that appeal, it did not go anywhere because they just realized that South Africa also is part of the UN binding treaties, which is free, prior, informed consent. Now they just forget that they are part of the binding treaties. They cannot appeal that decision. They take it aside. Now, what they put, because when they see this one, it does not work, they start another angle. Now they just realize, okay, this Transkei, because before 1994, there was a Transkei in Ciskei. This Transkei homelands, there is quite difficult for access because of it was put it out of the system of South Africa. Now let's push the building, the highway. Now it's easy for people because to access the road, nobody can say no to that. But do we need highway to access our communities? No, we don't need a highway. We need access road to access our villages. When you build the highway, you split indigenous communities. You destroy the connection between communities. You split them completely. There will be no more community any longer. And once you split them, it's easy for other projects to come because nobody cares what is going on. That is the intention of building the highway. Split that united in order to defeat them. And again, we argue to say that, we want the roads, but not the highway. We have no problem of building the road. But when we argue that, they said, you are anti-development. And we said, no, we're not saying no to road, but we just put an opinion because this road is for us. We want which way, but it's unfortunately, again, we've been told that we're anti-development because we say no to mining. Now we put an opinion for highway. That means this community does not want road, that they don't want development. Now, when we just talk about the N2 highway, they just said that, no, we need to build a smart city. And where the smart city you're going to build? We need to build a coastal city. The coast where they're talking about is where we live. Where are we going to go? Are we not saying we try to bring the back land to the people, but our own democratic government? For me, I'm not even ashamed to say that they are here to finish the unfinished business. That's what they are for. Because these coastal towns that you're talking about, they were there during the British colony. These highways that they are talking about, they were there on that plan. Nothing is new. Now, when you're going to push the people away from the coast, because coast is not good for our Africans, it's good for investors. Now, while we just try to understand what is a smart city, because smart city, again, we have no idea. They said that we discovered oil and gas on the wild coast, in the ocean. You see now, I've mentioned 4 things. 4 mega projects. That is why our communal land is under attack in the name of development. What is development actually? I think this is the thing that we need to ask all of us. Because you destroy land for the communities that they survive, and you destroy the ocean. That is the ocean that is part of our livelihood. That is the ocean that is our sacred place. What are you building? What are you developing? Those are the questions that we have. But out of all that, we are facing numerous threats. Thank you.
I think the other issue that I wanted to ask you, because most of the time community, community activists, they have a male face. What does it mean to be a female activist? Because, remember we had this conversation that what the Bazooka assassination meant for the transition of this, committee which represent the indigenous communities. And I want to put your face because you are a female and you are in the forefront of trying to protect the communities that sort of they don't have a voice. According to Mantashe, you are one of the worst enemies, Zara Mantashe, you know it very well. And I think you understand it very well because you're not a male activist, you're a female activist, in which is important for you sort of to reflect to the young females who want to enter into a space of leadership, because that's one of the things that is quite interesting as Amatiba Crisis Committee, because you are the face and most of the time you're the one that is you are a target.
Yeah, thank you. To be on this space as a female is very difficult. Quite difficult. You are disrespected. That's the most first thing. And you have been insulted. You are given name. You are being bullied. Even on social media. You decided to be out of social media because every time when you go there, you've been attacked. But no matter how you've been attacked, you must know your story, what you stand for. That's what keeps me standing. Because to be attacked, to be insulted, but if I'm standing for the truth, it won't change me. As yesterday, we were attending the meetings with the several departments. We have a big problem, private property rights versus communal land. Our government is having a deep problem. As we speak right now, they are approaching to expropriate our land. But the problem is that this land, it's owned in a collective way. It's not a private property where you speak with one person. Now, they have a big problem. They are trying to get so-called resolutions. The question, how are you going to get resolution? And they have a dilemma. They said that, no, we're going to get a village resolution. In our community, villagers are not taking resolution. We're taking resolutions together as a collective. Now, they try to take a shortcut to make sure that we get so-called fake resolutions. And then we're going to submit to the department that we've got resolution that the land must go through. When we stand on that, they said that women must not talk about land because land is owned by the man. And we said, says who? Again, that is why I was delayed yesterday, because I knew that as women, we need to stand Because we the one that we're going to suffer the most when the land is being taken away from us. We know today, South Africa, we reached the ceiling in terms of poverty. And the poverty is a man-made. It's not coming out of the blue. But if we are not standing up as women to tell our government, please make sure that don't take the land away from us. And make sure that you don't build our children as children of drug, because we have nothing to feed. When there's nothing to feed, all the kids were going to be the street kids. That's why we were standing yesterday. But when I stand up, I said that this land, it belongs to us and it belongs to our children. Please don't take our land away. They said that, no, we're expecting men to talk about that, not women. Women must follow. It's unfortunately, we cannot follow because we the one that we till the land. We the one, when the children, they're hungry, they said, Mom, I'm hungry. All what I'm saying, no matter how tough it is, we need to work together with men. Those men that they support the struggle. Those men that they know that we need to work together to build a future for good for all of us. Because we cannot separate it to say that, no, this is the issue of women. That's the problem that we created ourselves. We need to be together. And the good thing, no matter that we've been shut it down yesterday, but there were good men that they stood up. They said, we work the land together with women. Now, all our voices need to be heard equally.
I think I would like to thank you all to just have the conversation with Usis Nontle. Thanks very much.
Thank you, comrades. That was very illuminating. I like what you say about that men and women can work together. You know, we need not be divided, especially when it comes to, you know, things that we both care about. Solidarity in the home, in the household, that's quite cool. Okay, comrades, now we are going to have another 30-minute session and we'll take questions when we come back, like we did in the previous one, or for the previous one. I would like to call on Comrade Tladinyane and Dikgotso to share with us on the advice officers and their importance in communities. Comrades, if you can.
Amandla, Wanazania. Thanks, comrades, for giving us this opportunity to come and sit in front of you and share our life stories. Our life stories will come in a form of community advice offices. When I first heard about this winter school, what came to mind was a number of things and a number of processes. But I want just to quote 3 or 4 of them. I thought about Stephen Bantu Biko. There has been so many quotations about him since the beginning of the school until today. And I also thought about Ngugi wa Thiong'o. He also was covered on the first day. I also thought about Paulo Freire, and I'm supposed to mention his important quotation that I like most when he said, the strategy of the oppressed must remain within the knowledge of the oppressed and outside the knowledge of the oppressor. I also thought about 1976 uprisings. I also thought about the Fees Must Fall movement. But we are not here to talk about that. We are here to talk about community advice offices, which are NGOs. These NGOs are part of the broader civil society movement in our country. They deal mainly with issues of access to justice for the vulnerable and the poor. Almost 95% of the clients or visitors to the advice offices are the poor working class. Community advice offices are non-partisan. They do not support any political party, but that does not mean that they are not political. They are political. Hence, you see us here in this school. But I must mention that we are part of the Solidarity Action Committee's collective in the Free State, but we're working together with the Northwest and Gauteng, and it is our desire that the Solidarity Action committees must be seen in all over South Africa. Our clients, or the number of most of the people that come for assistance in the advice offices are the people who do not have or are not members of the unions, and especially when we deal with labor cases. Maybe I should talk about the services that the advice offices are providing. We provide basic legal services through the paralegals within the advice offices. And mainly our cases are coming from labor cases, evictions that has to do with land and housing, consumer cases, and many others. But this a major component of what we do at the advice offices. We also formulate campaigns and embark in protests together with the communities, because community advice offices are embedded within the struggles of the community. We also do advocacy. We hold authorities accountable. We are part of the service delivery struggles in the country. We are at the forefront. We also monitor the human rights violations that happens when we are holding the authorities accountable. We don't stop there. We also organize, mobilize the communities. Hence, we are part of the Solidarity Action Committees. Community advice offices provide a safe space for activists to meet, to connect, to reflect and learn. We also do capacity building. We don't only empower individuals, but we also empower other non-governmental organizations. We conduct human rights awarenesses in a form of workshops, pamphleteering. We also share video clips that highlights the human rights. We form resilient core groups of activists wherever we are. Maybe I should speak about the cases that we do, maybe to give us a clear picture of what we do. there are evictions that are happening. And South Africa has got 2 laws that govern evictions, which is the PI Act and the Esther Act. Majority of us here are familiar with the PI Act evictions because we come in from the urban areas. But I want to talk about the evictions that are happening in rural areas that are covered by the Esther Act, extension of Security Tenure Act. When a farm worker at a farm is expelled or is dismissed, that dismissal has got other secondary issues. It does not start and end. When you assist here, you don't start and end with referring a case to CCMA, representing the farm worker there. His employment contract is tied to his habitat. When a farm worker is dismissed, he can no longer stay at the farm. So a dismissal results in eviction. And it happens that the farm worker has got children attending school. That eviction, that dismissal also affects the education of the farm workers' children. In many cases, they are even assaulted before they are dismissed. We are talking about the involvement of SAPs, but because these people do not have the appreciation of the law, they think it is normal. White people should assault them like they are children. So a paralegal must be capacitated in such a way that when you deal with a dismissal from a farm worker, you must be able to identify all the cases or the secondary issues that are involved there. And you must be able to know where to refer each case. I think it is deliberate, comrades. The law that has been made, it is made to protect the whites. All these cases that I have mentioned, the education, when you deal with the education part of the dismissal, you go to a certain institution, you go to the Department of Education. The assault, you go to SAPS and the courts. The eviction, you go to Land Affairs and Rural Development. But it's one incident that has happened, but it affects